I didn't think things could get any more delusional than they have been, but here we are. I am extremely confused about this particular Formula One team and how a fan favourite whose hopes to be able to go there might pretty much be over. Because from what we've seen, they're facing immovable objects because they are quite clearly failing to see that there was an escape! Now, this being a Formula One channel, I would be remiss in not talking about every few months or so about the injustice of Lance Stroll's tenure within the sport. Him now being the most experienced driver to have ever hailed from Canada. I mean, just let that sink in. It's not the likes of Gilles Villeneuve, who was tragically taken away from us too soon. It's not even the goat of all time, old Nicky Boy. No, it's Lance Stroll. But to be fair, he is the most successful Lance to have ever raced in Formula One, even though historically there's only ever been two, so he's like the third in over 75 years. Although it is very interesting that he is not the first Lance to have ever raced for Aston Martin in any form of motorsport. That accolade taken by the likes of Lance Macklin. Back in 1950 and 51, he raced for Aston Martin at Le Mans and came first in his class twice. Not bad. However, this latest video stems from the fact that Fernando Alonso has been at it again, and once again saying that when he chooses to pass on the baton, that Lance will be ready to step up to the plate as Aston Martin's team leader. Now, immediately I can easily tell you that in regards to being a team leader, Lance Stroll is simply not ready. He has not at any point shown any qualities of a team leader. And whilst it gets under my skin to hear Fernando say what I'm about to share with you on this latest occasion, it's important to remember that this guy is not shy of frequenting with talented young drivers closely. Because you've only got to step back and think that even though he's been around Formula One for a very long time, so he's seen many talented people come and go, and he's somehow still here, recently he has been a mentor-like figure for two back-to-back junior champions. There's of course Oscar Piastri while he had his tenure over at Alpine and Renault, and then most recently there's been Gabriel Bortoleto. But anyway, here's what Fernando's had to say. I think Lance is very open always, as I am with him. I am in the final part of my career and I try to help him as much as I can, because he will be leaving the team very soon. This relationship was very strong since day one. I know Lance for many, many years. I know Lawrence as well. Lance is part of the team. His loyalty and his way of working with the team is maybe a little bit different than any other teammate that I had in the past. They could go somewhere else in the following year, or they were a little bit more reluctant to share things. Oh, that's a coded nod toward Lewis, isn't it? Or to work together into the future. While Lance is part of the Aston Martin family, so this makes things easier for everyone. Now, whilst there are some legit points in his quote, Fernando's not being completely delirious here, because he probably did meet Lance whilst they were both involved with Ferrari in the early part of the 2010s, because let's remember, Lance was a Ferrari Academy driver for a while. This piece to me very much comes across as a bit of very good PR to try and encourage people to accept the notion that as long as the Strolls are part of the Aston Martin family, Lance will endure. It is very important to remind people that this is something that Fernando is not saying of his own belief and preferences, and not to mention he owes Aston Martin a lot for keeping him in the Formula One game and actually giving him the time of day, and then finally the opportunity to be driving an Adrian Newey designed car come 2026. And I know people have been saying that, oh, he's going to be retiring at the end of 2026. Fernando said so. No, he did have a qualifier saying that he is pinning it as maybe his final year. If all's going really well, he will continue. Let's just wait until that date before confirming his retirement. Only when he actually announces it will it come true. Because put simply, the team isn't convincing anybody about Lance Stroll being the future of the team, even though Mike Crack has basically said the team revolves around him entirely. So they're relying on their prestigious Spaniard charge to hold the fort and provide some more substantial defense of the boss's son, since anything that comes from team principal Mike Crack solely is often brushed aside, from myself included, as just even more blatant flattery, and I will get to his latest piece in a bit. So in any case, if anybody out there is hoping that Yuki Tsunoda will just casually slip in and then assume the role of team leader if Fernando Alonso retires just because Honda are there, I think you'll be sorely mistaken, because Honda has said that they will not be pressuring Aston Martin in terms of a driver lineup that they have historically done in the past. However, this time around, I don't want to be just solely talking about Lance Stroll just being a terrible driver, because I think there is an even more important facet that he is terrible at as well. In regards to seeing him as a team leader, I just don't see it, because if he is going to become the team leader, he is going to have to change his ways considerably. Because being a team leader doesn't solely involve the things you do in the cockpit, it also involves the stuff you do outside of it. And as far as I'm concerned, Lance does nothing outside of the cockpit. He barely features. You can't be an absent team leader, Lance! Look at the other teams, and these leaders are quite clearly defined. Red Bull, you've got Max. McLaren, you've got Lando. Mercedes, you've now got George. Ferrari, well, on paper it's Lewis, but we'll come back to that in a few months, and considering that people are now starting to debate what's going on with the dressing room label, and people saying that Charles Leclerc is being favoured over Lewis and there's a conspiracy, oh dear. And at Williams now, you've got Carlos. And hey, that's not me being biased here, because Alex Albon said in a recent interview, he basically said that Carlos will be a good team leader, and that already is just making me thinking, well, Alex is just rolling over backwards already. I mean, but suffice to say, the most successful teams in the sport have a person who you can easily look at and say that they have leadership qualities of some kind. Even with the Ferrari situation, both Charles and Lewis have demonstrated the ability in the past to lead a team with varying degrees of success and competency. Fernando, too. Absolutely. Because you can't deny 2023 was a remarkable year for Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. He was leading that team unquestionably, and many people for a long time, thanks to his efforts, were thinking that Aston Martin were the legit rivals to Red Bull, albeit still a fair ways behind them at the beginning of 2023. In fact, it was their early good form that inspired me to climb up this thing. I mean, it did get a little bit harder for them after McLaren and Ferrari got their act together in the second half of the season, but still, Fernando had a really good year and helped them contribute to at least have a chance of fourth place in the Constructors, whereas with Lance, not so much. Did he get any podiums? No. Top 5 finishes? 3. A 4th and 2 5ths, and that P4 came about from that red flag malarkey in Melbourne, so the attrition rate was high with that one. 2023 was not kind to Lance, let's just say that. If there were any season to point toward to indicate potential leadership credentials for the future, that year wasn't it. Stroll drowned massively. Because the thing about this is that Aston Martin 2023 was suddenly on the map, and the attention toward Lance Stroll was more intense than ever, which meant that he could not make any mistakes, nor could he just fade away into the background like he had so often before. And it really didn't help matters that at some points during that season, he had a car which could trouble the RB19, at least joining them on the podium. It was a podium-capable car, and especially if Max or Checo had multiple DNFs, which they didn't because the reliability of that car was simply rock solid, then that car could have been capable of winning races. Monaco was particularly a really big opportunity for them, but no, Lance didn't even come close. Although this graph comparing Fernando and Lance does look promising for the future, and they do go toe-to-toe with one another, not bad. It's just a shame, though, that it's not during their time together in Aston Martin. It was back from 2017, when Alonso was driving one of the biggest pieces of junk that McLaren ever made. 2023? Oh, there we go. Now, you might be saying that I'm being unfair toward Lance Stroll, but there is one leadership quality that he does have, is that if you think Lance Stroll, you think Aston Martin. So that immediate association, top marks, Lance. But it doesn't really have positive connotations, you know? There's rarely been an heroic drive associated with the guy. Save for perhaps his drive in Bahrain to finish 6th despite still recovering from a wrist injury. But even then that was tainted near the start when he almost took out Fernando at turn 4. Look, I don't like hating on drivers just for the sake of it. I believe in giving credit where credit is due. And you've seen throughout many of my winners and losers video that whenever Lance has a good race and he actually provides some solid points to help the team, then I'm more than happy to give him credit. And at the same time though, I am more than happy to not give him credit and in fact critique him. Same goes for my boy here, Oscar. The second half of 2024 littered with many, many mistakes, and I'm not afraid to call him out, so I'm not afraid to actually lift Lance up on a pedestal whenever he has a good race, albeit being few and far between. But at the same time though, whilst Fernando is busy doing his own thing and the team basically allows him to help drag that car into places that it really doesn't deserve to be in, kind of like Ferrari in 2012, and that was the year that made me really like Fernando Alonso as a driver, Lance he just is near the back. He qualifies around the Q1 zone, and then he struggles to try and make any headway from there. And what I find particularly sobering is that after we came back from the summer break in 2024, Aston Martin really fell off a cliff, and it was only Fernando who could score points and bring anything home for them. 21 of them scored between Zandvoort and Abu Dhabi. all by the Spaniard. As for Lance, he didn't bring any points to the table, and that meant in terms of the post-summer constructors, Aston Martin was 7th. Not duking it out with maybe Haas or Alpine, them battling for 6th in the constructors. No, they were kind of going toe-to-toe with Racing Bulls, who they also had a major drop-off in terms of upgrades, and Williams. They were trying to fight for their lives to not be the 9th best team. And considering their aspirations and the facilities that they have, which are effectively first rate and some of the best on the entire grid, where they are on track as to where they are in terms of their kit, no, there is a big disparity here. To me, this is giving off serious Toyota vibes right here. A team throwing money at problems and hiring the best people in the business, and in theory, they've got a solid operation, yet they can't quite make it convert. That's not the kind of legacy Papa Stroll probably wants to have. And you know what really gets my Nicholas Latifi? Is the fact that instead of really trying to hone in on the problem and find some reason for it and do it quietly, instead of just going out and doing one on the media, no, Mike Crack's job, seemingly, is less about being the engineer-based mind that he is, and instead is basically going around to the press throwing out excuses. There's always some excuse with Aston Martin. Oh, it's nothing to do with the car. Oh, it's the way that our boy Lance is being treated by the media. That's his main job. And what I find really, really hilarious is that whilst he is doing that, Fernando is just busy doing his own thing and completely undermining the team. There's Mike Crack talking about that, oh, in 2025, we need to be self-critical when it comes to the weaknesses regarding our car. Then Fernando comes out and basically blames Mercedes and their wind tunnel for all of Aston Martin's problems. Yeah, every couple of months or so, you get Mike Crack coming out and saying to the media, hey, stop dissing our boy, you're being really mean toward Lance. So, yeah, here's the latest example for you via crash.net. Is Lance treated unfairly? Yes, big time. First of all, if you look at the gap that he has to his teammate, who is one of the best of all time, it's very small. We have someone who is very serious about car development, simulator driving, being fit, and being constructive in the meetings. He is judged mainly on the delivery of media duties. He's a racing driver, and for me, a racing driver has to drive in the first place. Now, we also know that Formula One has evolved. There's a lot of exposure and media duties and commitments. I think that is something people really put the focus on. What we do as a team, and this is especially the focus, is the gap to one of the best of all time. He's very competitive. Where we fall foul is just delivering the tools and the machine to both drivers to deliver that. When you see Fernando finish 9th in the championship, it's not amazing, but it's Fernando, so everybody says it's the car. Lance did a fantastic result in Mexico with the slowest car that day, finishing 11th. Nobody talks about it. Fernando finished 11th in Monza, and it's the big thing. So I think it's very unfair the way that he's perceived to the outside world. On the other hand, we don't bother about it too much. We know we have a different individual. Very nice, very constructive, working hard, pushing, and quick. Well, Mike, if you weren't so bothered about it, why are you bringing this up? And also, here's a point. Why don't you let Lance speak for himself? And yeah, you really should be bothering about it, mate, because in terms of public perception, even Max Verstappen gets why it's important. Sure, the Dutchman isn't a big fan of the notion and would rather focus on racing as well, but in the aftermath of the farce that was Sweargate in Singapore, it was clear that the relationship that Max has with the press is a very complicated but otherwise glowing and positive one behind the scenes. He gave them what they wanted at the expense of the FIA that weekend. He knew that they weren't to blame, but the point is though, is that Max is fully aware of what role the media and journalists play in the sport these days, and has enough of a working relationship with them to dance the dance and do it quite well. He participates. Now, I'm not saying that that's the biggest factor, but it's certainly a factor to consider. Whereas with Lance, well, you barely see him. And when you do see him, he barely gives off any answer. It seems like he hasn't got any media training whatsoever. Now, look, I understand that if you are a Lance Stroll supporter, you might be saying that, oh, you misunderstood, that he's introverted, he doesn't really like doing that sort of thing. Look, I get it. I don't like going out to parties. I would rather just stay at home on this ladder and make videos all day. But at the same time, I realise that I am a human being, a social creature, that I do have to get out there eventually. And if you're doing something that involves talking to people and getting yourself out there, you've got to at least have some sort of extrovert characteristics to be able to survive and cope. Lance just doesn't seem to have any of that at all. And like I said, the fact that Lance gets other people to talk for him does show also a certain amount of contempt, that he is not prepared to actually settle the score on his own terms, even if it's something that's scripted. It just has to come from his mouth. Because I think that's been one of the main contributors to the fact that white people just can't escape the fact that nepotism surrounds him completely. And he will never get rid of the fact that he is basically a pay driver, somebody who is paid to be there. You contrast that with Sergio Perez, because I recall Checo being labelled as such when he arrived in 2011, only there to help keep Sauber afloat thanks to his billionaire backer Carlos Slim, people said. However, a combination of great results and an ability to court the press and garner positive headlines and just being a nice bloke led to the Mexican to become a firm fan favourite for a long time, as well as a giant killer at points with Force India, and people soon forgot. Cut to Lance, we didn't really get much of that. Yeah, the attrition rate around Baku, where he got his first podium, was mighty, but Stroll made it to the end regardless, and for a rookie, that was not bad. Actually, when you think about it, in his second year, 2018, you could almost feel sorry for the Canadian due to the fact that Williams completely fell off a cliff. They were nowhere, they were 10th in the constructors, they barely scored anything. His teammate Sergei Sorokin was barely able to do anything as well. You felt like, oh, well, that's a shame. Williams have just not got a car that can really help him and gain any footing. People thought that before Racing Point became Racing Point when Papa Stroll bought out Force India, that would have been that for Lance Stroll, because no other team would have hired him because Williams was sinking. But no, we then got F1's worst kept secret, and Lance then became a team member. And after that, basically people were just thinking, nah. And ever since then, he's had a standoffish attitude to the press, and it's really not been kind to him. The relative silence has been deafening, which has meant that incidents like Qatar 2023 stand out all the more. The rare times where Lance has no choice but to be in the spotlight, and considering that very little consideration has been taken to focus on public perception, it made the situation a whole lot worse, and it makes us still talk about it to this day. Oh, and another perk of getting Fernando Alonso as Lance Stroll's teammate, he's such a huge public figure within Formula One that if you just stick him on social media, people will lap it up, and they will not think twice about the fact that Lance Stroll is barely there. Just get Fernando Alonso to smolder at the camera and then do a couple of memes, and there you go, sorted. Look, I understand if Lance is shy or reluctant to engage with the press, but I reiterate my earlier point. You have to be engaging with the press if you are going to be the team leader that Fernando Alonso supposedly claims that you are going to become. The only way that Lance Stroll doesn't have to do any of that, or maybe slightly less of that, is to, as Jacques Villeneuve puts it, not just be liked amongst the media, but to also win. Because according to Jacques Villeneuve, you have respect and your achievements to back it up. The Canadian champion is right. Being liked is critical. It's positive energy you get from the fans, from your side of the garage, from everyone. If you have the world cheering you on, then you are absolutely guaranteed to do well. And in some rare cases, if you are a Max Verstappen and you basically don't care what anyone thinks and you have the confidence in which to be able to convert it and the results speak for themselves, then you can feed off the negativity. You can just think, yes, feed me. And also at the same time, when your team is having internal politics and your dad and your boss are basically fighting, Max has the ability to just go, stop it. So yeah, Villeneuve is right. Being liked is a very important stepping stone at the beginning of your F1 career, or in some cases during your troubling middling years, to be able to help sustain you. Whereas Mike Crack's assertions are basically saying, oh, we don't really care much about that. We know our boy through and through. And yeah, that's all very well and good. But the fact is, though, is that what Aston Martin are doing is failing to convince anybody. He will have to at some point, because Max does, Lando does, Charles does, Lewis does, Carlos does, Fernando does. I'm bored about talking about the performance side of things. Put simply, Stroll is no leader if he isn't prepared to go in front of the cameras and represent the team and brand in a competent and dignified manner. And this is going to be very important come 2026, because as the years have progressed since 2019, when the Stroll family bought out Force India and became its sole owners, right now, there are far more voices to be heard. The shareholders, as has been made clear this year with Racing Bulls and Red Bull Racing, are very, very big people that you will want to be paying attention to if they've got a gripe. Because come 2026, Honda will be arriving as a power unit supplier, and Aramco will be really increasing their influence with the inclusion of their sustainable synthetic fuels. They will want to, the Saudi Arabian company, the huge oil conglomerate, they will want to make sure that whoever car that they are providing fuel to will be the best. And you might be thinking, oh no, it's Honda and Fernando, expect hijinks. Yeah, they've had a rocky past together while they were in McLaren. But since then, both parties have branded that period as water under the bridge, effectively. The Spaniard no longer having any issues with the power unit supplier at all. And another thing we have to consider is that Papa Stroll is not the only major voice anymore. With him trying to secure the services of Adrian Newey and trying to bring as much success as he was able to bring with Red Bull and McLaren and Williams in the past, he's made effectively Adrian, in trying to secure his services, a partner, a major one on the technical front, as well as the overall scope of the team. This is not just a case of him being the car's designer. He is the person in charge of the whole widget in terms of how the car comes to life. There might come a situation in a couple of years' time, after a few tricky races, if Lance Stroll simply can't convert, if there comes a situation where Newey's cars were able to get results with Fernando but nothing from Lance or not enough, then there might be some suggestions saying that we can only win constructors titles if we have two solid drivers. And Lance ain't getting any younger. He is heading now towards his late 20s, and it's now becoming very, very clear that Formula One is getting a heck of a lot younger. Come 2025, there are only going to be 4 drivers over the age of 30, and the vast majority of them are in their 20s, and we have 6 rookies. That's going to be even more reasons as to why people are going to be looking to Lance with very big speculative question marks, because these 6 rookies are going to be gunning for him. They are going to be wanting a long-term future in Formula One, and for the teams higher up the order to take them seriously and become team leaders over there. So Lance is living on borrowed time, and sure, he in 2026, much like with Fernando, is currently going to have one of the best organizations in the business. If he can't convert that and make that car dance like Alonso potentially could, because let's be real, Newey and Alonso have been looking forward to working together for many, many years, in fact decades, then that might be it for Stroll. But right now, he ain't going anywhere. But the fact is, though, is that Lance, if he wants to be a team leader, and he wants to be taken seriously and considered a team leader to begin with, he needs to actually start talking. He needs to be a presence. He can't just hide in the shadows. For those thinking that Papa Stroll would rather sell his stake in the team than let anyone else take his son's seat, then I don't think the Saudi Arabian contingent would be that bothered. I think Aramco would just buy out his stake in the team. Papa Stroll can then try and maybe recoup some of the debt the Aston Martin Lagonda company has, and then we'll just get Aston Martin morph into just Aramco Honda. They'll just continue Honda and Aramco together without the Stroll family. But yeah, don't expect people to be playing nice with Lance, especially the likes of the major 6 rookies, which include Fernando Alonso's latest challenger and major talent, Gabriel Bortoleto. So to find out more about these 6 talented rookies coming into the sport for their first full F1 season, you can go and watch this video next, straight after this one.